Here's everything you might have missed in the Legend of Vox Machina episodes 4 through 6. Folks, things are getting awfully grim over on the Legend of Vox Machina. The Critical Role-inspired series is plunging headlong into the Briarwoods arc from Campaign 1 in its latest batch of episodes. The terrifying trio that dropped on Friday on Prime Video is full of necromantic murder monsters, lore galore, and plenty of Easter eggs for eagle-eyed fans. Now we're going to break down all the Easter eggs and hidden details that you might have missed in just a moment, but to do so we obviously need to spoil what happens in the Legend of Vox Machina episodes 4 through 6. We'll also be touching on light spoilers for Critical Role Campaign 1 and 3, so if you're worried about that sort of thing, leave now before it's too late.
Everybody up! Creepy incoming!
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? Let's begin with Delilahbriarwood and her creepy case full of all manner of necromantic artifacts. In addition to too many loose eyeballs, which is any number more than 1, we see a raven skull. And this could be a reference to Campaign 3, where Marisha Ray's character Laudna not only has a dead rat puppet with a raven skull named Pate de Rollo, but Delilahbriarwood is her warlock patron as well. Now it's likely not the same raven skull, but the similarities are too good not to mention. Next up we meet the party's jailer while they're under house arrest, Captain Jarrett. In the original campaign, he was a guard hired by Vox Machina to watch over their keep. Here though, he works for the Sovereign Uriel for the time being. As Scanlan peruses Lady Briarwood's spellbook, we see references to both the wolf-like creatures that menace the party in episode 5 and people in chains, which is maybe a nod to the torture chambers that the Briarwoods run so gleefully over in Whitestone. As confirmed later in the episode, the table everyone's sitting around is an animated homage to the custom Wormwood gaming table that Critical Role used during Campaign 2, and while it's no longer in use, it's now immortalized in animated form. Moving on, during Percy's flashbacks, we see a group shot of the Briarwoods and their lieutenants. And while we meet Stonefell on the right-hand side later in this batch of episodes, the two on the left should be of particular note for Critical Role fans. These are Goran and Ripley, two of the nastier enemies the party encounters over the course of their adventures. More upsetting, though, is when Percy and his sister Cassandra are running away from the Briarwoods and Cassandra is riddled with arrows. And you can see their hands are covered in blood and their fingernails have been ripped off. And this references the gruesome torture they endured at the Briarwoods' hands. After the gang gets caught trying to elude their house arrest, we see Percy working on modifying his trusty pepperbox, Bad News. And we see the gun in action and invoked by name in episode 6. As we learned in Campaign 1, the gun is named Bad News because nothing travels faster. Moving on, we come to those undead murder monsters that the Briarwood sent to retrieve Delilah's missing book. In the original campaign, these were actually invisible stalkers, but now they're seemingly wraiths, which according to D&D lore are sensitive to sunlight, hence why Keyleth's spell is super effective against them and turns the tide for the rest of the party. Now speaking of those wraiths, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm fairly certain the one wraith with longer hair around its skeletal visage is meant to be our hidden Matt Mercer character in this episode. And it's definitely much more horrifying than the ones we've seen thus far, but considering the amount of nightmarish creatures and monsters Matt has portrayed during the Critical Role run thus far, well, it's pretty fitting. And last but not least for this episode, before the gang departs the keep, we see a jar in the background behind Percy. Inside is what appears to be a blue turd, and this is a throwback to Campaign 1 episode 27 where Scanlan takes a magical blue dump as a result of a potion that he bought from Gilmore, really putting the dye back in diarrhea. Moving on, in the opening moments of episode 5, we see a familiar logo on the wall behind Vax. This is the symbol of the Clasp, the Thieves Guild of Tal'Dorei who have a chapter in Amon as well. Now, after some light B&E, Vax, Vex, and Keyleth find themselves trapped by Gilmore inside of a magical representation of an 8-sided die. Inside of Gilmore's glorious goods, we are once again treated to a cavalcade of Easter eggs, including what appears to be a purple mask behind Gilmore. And this could be a reference to the fact that Sam Riegel voiced Donatello for a while in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series. We also see on the right-hand side a doll wearing a hanbok, a traditional Korean dress, which might be a fun background detail from the Korean animators at Production Rev who worked on this series. Later, when Vax is looking over Gilmore's weapon selection, he says,
Dagger, dagger, dagger. Wooden stake. Perfect.
Dagger, dagger, dagger became a running joke and a bit of a catchphrase for actor Liam O'Brien to describe Vax's actions during combat, which, surprise, surprise, usually involved a lot of daggers. While on the way to Whitestone, the party is waylaid by those mysterious wolf monsters from Delilah's book, and they turn out to be more like a cross between Displacer Beasts from D&D and Demogorgons, or maybe the alien from Lilycat than a straight-up wolf. Regardless, they are absolutely terrifying. Now, once the team settles down to camp for the night, Scanlan tests a magical scroll on himself, which results in a number of unexpected transformations. And the one that looks like a combination of a unicorn and a serpent, that's actually directly from an illustration done on the Tavern Keeper build video that Critical Role and Titmouse put out based on audience feedback. Later on, when the party's swapping Campfire Stories, we get a number of quick references to past Vox Machina adventures. Vax's story is a throwback to his battle against Hodis the Rakshasa, the shape-shifting Catman from Campaign 1, Episode 20 and 21. Keyleth's story of accidentally drowning a Durgar guard in lava is just as horrifying as it sounds and comes from the Underdark arc in Campaign 1, Episode 6. And lastly, Grog's story is taken verbatim right down to the gruesome tongue ripping from Campaign 1, Episode 4 when he murdered a boulette in brutal fashion. As for Scanlan's, well, that is just straight up hentai. Moving on, when we arrive in Whitestone, you can see a sign for the Alcove, a store that sells magical items from the original campaign. And as the party walks into town, we see a character that looks an awful lot like Matt Mercer with an eye patch ducking into an alleyway. And that completes our Matt Watch for this episode. But I have to say, far and away the most brutal reveal of this episode is that the Briarwoods made a bunch of villagers cosplay as Vox Machina only to hang them from the Sun Tree. And as for that little girl in their group, she's voiced by Scanlan actor Sam Riegel's daughter, Kestrel. And that makes this a TPK for the characters voiced by the cast's real-life children thus far. Finally, we come to Episode 6, which opens with the scene of the Resistance in Whitestone planning their attack. On the wall, we see an elaborate map of Whitestone, which matches the one that Percy actor Taliesin Jaffe shared on Instagram back in 2015. Now, the eye patch-wearing Matt Mercer character is also back and apparently part of the Resistance as well. Later on, when Yenin is leading Vox Machina to the Resistance base, the man who whistles that the coast is clear is modeled after Titmouse CEO and executive producer Chris Pernowski. Now, during the planning phase, when Scanlan describes his method of attack, we see him depicted as this towering beef castle. And this is a reference to Scanbo, a portmanteau of Scanlan and Rambo from Campaign 1, when this body bard basically turned into a one-man army. And based on both the official soundtrack and promo materials, we know we'll be seeing Scanbo before you know it, so just stay tuned for more. Now later on, the party decides to split up into two teams, a trope in D&D and horror movies that is immediately called out as being a bad idea.
When has splitting the party ever worked?
Since shut the f*** up.
The team splits into two groups, one to enter from the front, the other to go through the back door. And we saw something similar recently in Campaign 3 with Team Backdoor and Team Full Frontal as well. What follows, though, is another instance of Vox Machina fighting their true arch-nemesis, the Humble Door.
Doors!
As we mentioned last time, it is such an enduring foe for these characters, it has its own dedicated enemy page on the Crit Roll Stats website. Later on during the battle, we see Keyleth use her Druidic Wild Shape ability to turn into one of her most iconic animal forms, namely Minxie the Saber-Toothed Tiger, and she used this ability numerous times during the course of Campaign 1. Next up, when No Mercy Percy comes out to play and take his vengeance on Stonefell, he utters another memorable line taken directly from the original campaign.
Let me say, you were the one I was least looking forward to.
And last but not least, we get a fun homage to one of the Mighty Nine's favorite tactics in Campaign 2, the Fluffernutter. Far deadlier than the sandwich for which it's named unless you're allergic to peanuts, the Fluffernutter was an attack devised by Knot and Jester. It involved shooting a keg of black powder with an explosive projectile, thereby creating a bomb. Here, though, we see Grog hurl a barrel of presumably extremely high-proof alcohol, which Vex detonates with a well-timed magical arrow to blow their enemies to smithereens. And there you have it, folks. That is everything we spotted in The Legend of Vox Machina episodes 4 through 6. New episodes will roll out each Friday over on Prime Video, but if you want to go deeper into the world of Vox Machina, you can watch all of Campaign 1 right now over on Geek and Sundry's YouTube channel. In the meantime, though, tell us, what did you think of The Legend of Vox Machina's latest episodes? Did you spot anything that we missed?
How can you arrest a house?
Okay.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.